But we're doing even better this morning because we haven't just got an angel, or lots of angels with us, and the three above us, of course. We have got Jesus, Queen of Heaven, with us. Amazing, isn't it? By which I mean, welcome to Jo Clifford, who's kind of a superhero for me as a trans woman, as a pioneer, as a trans playwright, but much more than that. And she's been performing at St. Stephen's Church just up the road the last 2 nights, her wonderful play, The Gospel According to Jesus, Queen of Heaven. And hopefully we'll share a little bit about that. But it's such a joy to have you here in Pitt Street, and I hope that you feel at home.
Such a joy for me to
And I know we have a lot of distinguished visitors with us today. And I thought about this, and I thought, well, you're all distinguished visitors. And that's the point of the story of the gospel when we come to it. And I'm doing a little bit of a sermon here because we're going to have a chat rather than me talk. Because I love this story, the baptism of Jesus. It's in all the 4 Gospels, not like the birth stories, which are sort of only in 2 Gospels, because it's so important. And it says at the end of it, when the voice speaks, it says, "You are my beloved, in you I am well pleased." So important. And it comes just before, in most of the synoptic Gospels, it comes just before the temptations. That's why we're able to bear with temptations and why Jesus saw their way through that, because they knew they were beloved. And in Christ, we are all beloved. So I want you to, just for a moment, just to take that in, that I know this is the most difficult thing for that ourselves. We can think about other people being beloved, can't we? But that we are beloved. In God, God is well pleased with us. And that's what we celebrate today.
A contemporary reading from The Shaking of Foundations by Paul Tillich. Grace strikes us when we are in great pain and restlessness. It strikes us when we walk through the dark valley of a meaningless and empty life. It strikes us when we feel that our separation is deeper than usual because we have violated another life, a life which we loved, or from which we were estranged. It strikes us when our disgust for our own being, our indifference, our weakness, our hostility, and our lack of direction and composure have become intolerable to us. It strikes us when, year after year, the longed-for perfection of life does not appear, when the old compulsions reign within us as they have for decades, when despair destroys all joy and courage. Sometimes at that moment, a wave of life breaks into our darkness, and it is as though a voice was saying, "You are accepted. You are accepted. Accepted by that which is greater than you, and the name of which you do not know. Do not ask for the name now. Perhaps you will find it later. Do not try to do anything now. Perhaps later you will do much. Do not seek for anything. Do not perform anything. Do not intend anything. Simply accept the fact that you are accepted." If that happens to us, we experience grace. After such an experience, we may not be better than before, and we may not believe more than before. But everything is transformed. In that moment, grace conquers sin, and reconciliation bridges the gulf of estrangement, and nothing is demanded of this experience. No religious or moral or intellectual presupposition, nothing but acceptance. In the light of this grace, we perceive the power of grace in our relation to others and to ourselves. We experience the grace of being able to look frankly into the eyes of another, the miraculous grace of reunion of life with life. We experience the grace which is able to overcome the tragic separation of the sexes, of the generations, of the nations, of the races, and even the utter strangeness between human beings and nature. Sometimes grace appears in all these separations to reunite us with those to whom we belong. For life belongs to life. And in the light of this grace, we perceive the power of grace in our relation to ourselves. We experience moments in which we accept ourselves because we feel that we have been accepted by that which is greater than we. If only more such moments were given to us. For it is such moments that make us love our life, that make us accept ourselves, not in our goodness and self-complacency, but in our certainty of the eternal meaning of our life. For the good news of Jesus in modern expression, thanks be to God.
The second reading comes from the Gospel of Luke. The people were full of anticipation, wondering in their hearts whether John might be the Messiah. John answered them all by saying, I am baptizing you in water, but someone is coming who is mightier than I, whose sandals I am not fit to untie. This one will baptize you in the Holy Spirit and in fire. A winnowing can is in his hand to clear the threshing floor and give the wheat into the granary, but the chaff will be burnt in an unquestionable fire. When all the people were baptized, Jesus also came to be baptized. And while Jesus was praying, the skies opened, and the Holy Spirit descended on the anointed one in visible form, like a dove. A voice from heaven said, You are my own, my beloved. On you my favour rests. For the light of God revealed in Christ.
You've already had a little bit of a sermon from me this morning, but if you want another one, I've written one actually. It's on Penny and my sermons blog, which is called Pen and Ink Reflections, and it's in the sheet there, and we'll send it out as well, because that makes sense. Probably you've been wondering what all those icons are in there. But the icon, that's the way I see the baptism. And some of these stories we're having at the moment in Epiphany, they're like icons. Those of you who understand icons, and my sermon tries to introduce us a little bit to that. Ways in which the light of God can speak to us through these classic moments in the stories in the Gospels. And it's a very visual tradition. And in the Western world, we tend to go up into our heads and our ears. But in the wider world, all the senses, particularly in the Orthodox tradition. So there are three there, and there are two of them at the back by female artists who are part of what's called the Lviv School of Icon makers, contemporary icon creators. Lviv in Ukraine, and very much, as you can see, not just trying to remind us of the way in which the transcendent touches the reality of life. And Nowosielski, the artist at the front, one of the greatest of Polish artists. Parliament in Poland 2 years ago declared a year of Jerzy Nowosielski because of his work, of blending together really modern art with the ancient traditions of the faith. So if you'd like to explore that a little bit, and particularly that visual element in our faith and spiritual traditions that might speak to some of us at any rate. But even better, I think, than the visual or the heard is the performed. And this is part of why I'm so thrilled, with just one element of it, why I'm so thrilled that Jo is with us today and the last couple of nights, because of her performance of a reworking. I think I put in that first hymn, Queering Stories, which are really there, as Jo reminds us, in the gospel stories. Why on earth did we turn them into rather boring, oppressive, straight stories when they're actually full of life, full of queerness, full of magic and angels, and full of Jesus, the Queen of Heaven? So I'm going to invite Jo, or you could sit there if you like, Jo, if that's whatever work suits you best. I don't know.
Yes, I think I'd be happier sitting down if
that's
all right.
Fine. So I thought we'd just have a little chat, Jo, and you could just say a little bit about your work. And I have to say, I'm more and more impressed the more I find out about you, especially since I discovered that you are now officially, according to the very prestigious Saltire Society, an outstanding woman of Scotland, which is pretty impressive for somebody born in England, isn't it, really?
I think I will. I don't like people being behind me when I speak.
Would you like a chair up front here? That's probably the best thing, isn't it?
Oh, that'd be brilliant. Thank you, love. That's great. Thank you. Yes, I was very, very, very moved to get that honour. That was a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Yes, fantastic. And you've been a playwright for many, many, many years, haven't you? That's...
Well, I knew I was going to be a writer from the time when I was about 10 or 11, so that would have been 1961, 1962. And I discovered theatre when I was about 14 years old. And I was given the opportunity to be in school plays. I was in a single-sex, all-male school, and I was given the girls' parts. And I just adored that. And I still remember that first feeling of being in rehearsal and just standing, just walking in this magical space of the theatre where anything can happen. I loved that. And suddenly I stopped being shy. I was someone who really seemed to have a place in the world. I just adored that. And of course, I adored the performance and being able to wear girls' clothes, which I really hadn't been able to do before. And I loved that. But as time passed, I discovered people were beginning to see how much I liked being a girl. And this was a deeply oppressive English public school that operated on bullying. And I realized that if people really came to know that, it would be very dangerous for me. And I had to suppress that. And with that, I suppressed my connection with the theatre. And for many years, I tried to become a novelist. I was a rubbish novelist because every page said, he said, she said, he replied. Well, it was very dull. But I kept on trying because theatre never actually let go of me. When I was 30 years old, through an outrageous series of what seemed to be coincidences, and our first child was born, I had a play on in the Edinburgh Festival, a translation. And I went along every night. It was on for a week, and our new baby Rebecca was in a sling. And I don't know what I was more proud of, the play or my daughter. Didn't do well at all. It was a translation of a Spanish play. Tiny audiences, 8 or 9 on a good night, but they laughed. I heard people laughing at words I'd written. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew I was a playwright. And it took me another 5 years to really find my voice. So that was 20 years after that first awful moment of deep oppression in the school.
Well, thank God that's the case. And what you say about humour and life, that it sort of exudes, but the moments of depth and touching your heart, that comes out in your work. But I think the way in which you engage people, I think, is just terrific. And I think you might be willing to share a little bit of that later on, or a little touch of that. But I wanted to ask, because this play, particularly, I mean, you've written about 20 or more plays.
Oh, 110, dear, to be
Is 110,
precise.
yes. And won the prestigious award of the Owen Waymark Award by the Writers Guild of Great Britain.
Oh, yes, I won an award. I don't win many awards because usually it's committees that decide awards, and there's always one person on the committee that hates what I've done. But I did win that award, and that was for being kind to somebody. That's a lovely award to get. I can't quite remember where. But anyway.
That's terrific. So, but the play you're best known for is The Jesus Queen of Heaven, isn't it? I guess, but or infamous for, probably we might say.
Yes.
How did you come to write that? What did it mean to you in the past, and what does it mean to you now?
Well, the thing is, forgive me, I'm interrupting you.
No, go for it.
But when in the 1990s, when I was in my 40s, I'd been living as John Clifford. I'd been doing very well as John Clifford, but I realised I had to write about being trans. And I started then to put trans characters into plays. And that was really silly of me in the 90s because no one else was doing that. No, it wasn't even an issue for most people. And all those plays got turned down. And I stopped being successful. And I understood that if I was to do this, I would have to stage my own work myself, which terrified me. And also I would have to perform my own work, which, again, terrified me, because really I was blocked as a performer for about 35 or 40 years. And I wanted to understand why did I hate myself? Why did other people hate me? And I figured it was something to do with the Bible. And so I wrote a play about the Old Testament called God's New Frock, which is all about the fact that actually, although in the Old Testament God goes on and on about being male and the only one, there's a lot of female deities in the Old Testament. There's God's wife. I bet you didn't know there was a Mrs. God in the Bible, but there is. And a lot of the story, a lot of the energy of the Old Testament goes into the male God suppressing his female counterparts. And I saw that as a parallel to my story, because that's what I try to do. So I tell the story of God, and I tell the story of me. I was pretty angry with the Bible at that time, and at the end of the play, I said, the Bible is a work of pornography. I condemned it. And I thought people might be offended by that, but actually nobody seemed to care. And eventually I learned to love performing it, but oh, good heavens, then I had a nervous breakdown, and the producer got terribly ill, and the director got fed up with working in the theatre, and then, a year or two later, the love of my life, Susie, fell down, became very ill with a brain tumour and died, and I was looking after her, and then I became very ill after she died. I had to have open heart surgery, and I forgot about this play. I literally forgot about it. And then, amazingly, it was translated into Italian. And I got flown out to Florence to see it. La nuova tonacca di Dio. And it was a huge hit. This was 2008. That play is still being performed in Italy. Oh, isn't that amazing? And I went, lovely theatre. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll write you a sequel about the New Testament. But because it's rubbish, I don't know if any of you have ever tried to get money out of Italian theatres, but I don't recommend it. They're very, very bad at paying. But I said, if you give me a flat for free in Florence for 3 weeks next summer, I'll write you the sequel. And to my amazement, they did. And to prepare for it, I thought, gosh, I'll have to read the Gospels. And I was so moved by what I found. Because Jesus, I understood, is a friend, always was a friend of the oppressed, always was a friend of those who suffered from prejudice or discrimination. And I knew he would accept me. And so I wanted to write a play that expressed that. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But anyway, there I was in Florence thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Help. And I went, there's an amazing cathedral in Florence with the most beautiful Pietà. And I saw that, and somehow I thought, Jesus is the main character. What if Jesus came back to earth in the present day as a trans woman? What if? What would she say? What would she do? And, well, I had 3 weeks. And I wrote the play. And then I sent it to the theatre, and they never replied. I thought, oh, okay, well, they don't want to do it, do they? I better do it myself. And I managed to get a small amount of money out of a festival in Glasgow and put it on in November 2009. This work of devotion. And when I turned up for the first night, the street outside the theatre was full of angry Christians. Hundreds of them. Hundreds and hundreds of angry Christians. And the Catholics had brought a statue of the Virgin Mary because apparently I'd insulted her. And they were praying to her. And the Protestants had got stern placards that said things like, God says, my son is not a pervert. Oh, no, in Glasgow, you might know, Glasgow has a terrible history of Catholics hating Protestants and vice versa. But I brought them together. Because they all came together to hate me. And I got denounced by an archbishop. That's happened quite a lot. And I was all over the tabloid press. And the BBC filmed the demonstration. And so news of it spread all over the world. And by the end of that week, if you Googled the Gospel according to Jesus, Queen of Heaven, you would have got about at least 400,000 hits. Thank God this was before Facebook was really operational. And if you then followed the links, you would find every one of them was saying what a disgusting person I was, how disgraceful this play was, how appalling it was, how terrible. The Archbishop said it was hard to imagine a greater affront to the Christian faith. And I had to have police in the auditorium to protect me. There was a lot of hatred and violence around. I was so frightened, and I felt very alone because afterwards the director was traumatized and she said, I can't touch this play again. And the producer, whose the windows of his office had been smashed in, said, I can't touch it. And the theatre box office, they'd all had death threats, and they said, we can't touch it. And I was all alone, and I thought, I almost gave up, but I thought, well, because and it was a tiny theatre, seated theatre, 30 people for 5 nights. 150 people saw this play. Luckily, they all loved it. And I remembered their love and the love of my pastor. And I thought, the fact that so many people have hate this play means it must be important. I don't understand why, but it must be important. And I must keep it going. I had no idea how or why. But somehow I found a director and a producer, and woof.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Bea, for that. And it's been taken up by others, hasn't it, across the world, not least in Latin America by others?
Well, yes. I mean, it took me a long time to recover from the trauma. But in 2014, I just sold my house to downsize, and I had a bit of money left over, so I put it into putting the show on in the Fringe. Church, kind of a bit like this. Not quite so gorgeous. The only slot left was late at night, 10:30. Terrible time for a show like Queen Jesus. Tiny audiences. I lost all my money, as you do. Don't put a show on in the festival fringe. You'll lose your money. But the right people came. And two things happened. People came who were able to fund it when we brought it back the following year and take it to a better venue. And the very last night of all this, young woman came up to me and she said, she was crying. She said, "You have changed my life." People actually say that a lot. Please give me the script because I want to translate it into Portuguese and put it on in Brazil. So I gave her the script and she translated it that night. By the next morning she had a draft of it and we met. And the following year, somebody came along who was booking shows. He ran a festival in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, and he invited us. And we got the money to do that in 2016. And so I did the play in Brazil. Now, Brazil, you probably know, is a country that kills the most trans women in the entire world. It's incredibly violent. And there I was, going off to perform this play. I was so frightened. And I've never in my life given so many press interviews. It sold out, the show sold out within hours of it being announced. And it was a time of incredible unrest and fear in Brazil. And the strain of it actually got to me. I collapsed on stage in the last night and spent 3 days in intensive care. But, meantime, the show had gone ahead. And this lovely woman, Natalia Malo, had in the meantime found a fantastic trans actress to play Jesus. They hadn't managed to get anybody to put it on because everybody was frightened of it, but the fact that we'd done it gave a festival in a place called Londrina the courage to put the play on. Oh my goodness, they had death threats. The tech crew were assaulted as they were trying to set the show up. They were forced out of their venue at the very last minute. They had to go to a new place. There was a guy wandering around outside the church, openly carrying guns, saying, "I'm going to shoot that faggot who's playing Jesus." Incredible fear. And they didn't have time to advertise the new venue. So what they did was that they gathered the audience in the original venue and they were going to process to the next one. And as they arrived, there was a group of women who were pregnant and women with young children who said, "We know we can't get tickets because it had sold out. We know we can't get in to see the show, but we want to form a circle of protection around Renata." That's the woman playing Queen Jesus. And everybody processed in this beautiful, loving way to the new venue. And the show was a huge, huge hit. And from then on, it toured all around Brazil for the next 3 years, I think, encountering death threats, attempts to stop it, all kinds of trouble. But the queues to see that show stretched all the way around the block in every city it went to. And people tell me that it has changed Brazilian theatre forever. And when I go back to Brazil, trans women come up to me and say, "You have no idea. You have no idea. Your play has saved our lives." And lovely Renata Carvalho, who at the time she was cast was in despair. And she said, "I'm going to have to go back to sex work." Is now a big star, a film star.
Do you get any royalties? No.
No, I don't get any of it, but I'm so happy for her. Yeah.
That's great. You could go on. What an amazing person Jo is. I wanted to ask one more question, because you've open the subject up. And the time you're talking about there was sort of the period that I was working out how I was going to get out in the church. And your example, and against the sort of odds like you're speaking of in Brazil, is so encouraging to trans people who are seeking to come out. And you must know that of the lives you've touched, the people who've said all the others that you'll never hear about. And I just like to say thank you on behalf of so many trans people that contact me and others that I will never know, of the impact that you've had. And it's such a joy to have you here in Sydney, which is, as you know, in Anglican terms, probably the worst, the most, I shouldn't say worst, the most conservative Anglican community in the Western world. And the city itself is a very conservative space on lots of things, with a few exceptions, as you've discovered. So you give heart to us to continue to work on against we don't have too many death threats here, but we have a few threats around, to continue that. And I wanted to ask you, because it's such a long journey, and I know there are many trans people now involved in the theatre and in all sorts of walks of life, where you see things going now. Because a few years ago I thought Scotland was leading the way with trans, and then the British Parliament sort of slowed it down. I'm still trying to get my birth certificate and marriage thing changed, and it's pretty grim. But I wondered where you think we're up to, because I think we've come a long way, haven't we? But are there signs of hope? Because at the minute we're right in the middle of the culture wars.
I think there's an amazing signs of hope, yes. When I first did Jesus, this show in 2009, as far as I knew, I was the only openly trans performer, probably in Britain. And yet, now, in November I was in a short film, and my co-star was a trans man who works as a drag queen and a drag king. The makeup artist was a model who is also a drag king and a drag... the scene is exploding, really. We are becoming so much more visible in a way. When I was a child, in the 50s, I thought there was no opportunity ever that I would even be able to come out. Never mind, stand here, travel to Australia on a woman's passport. How incredible is that? That is incredible. And of course, the Conservatives are frightened. Now, they are frightened of us because, there's a whole political thing. If you come to see my new show in Melbourne, 36, it's all explained there. But it's fundamental, the idea of manhood that I fought against. The idea that to be a man, you have to conquer your weakness, you have to overcome your vulnerability, you have to overcome a whole kind of soft, effeminate area of yourself. That is replicated in the way we treat nature. That is replicated in the way, in order to succeed in business, you have to stop your empathy. You have to be prepared to cheat and grind down and exploit your fellow human beings. And so this idea of what it means, the traditional ideas of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, all that has to change. And all that is changing. But of course, there's a massive pushback. But my goodness, the change. My mum, my dear mum, she saw that as far as she was concerned, her function in life was to find a husband, look after him, and bear his children. Well, young girls now are not brought up to believe that. Massive changes. Of course, men need to change too. That's very clear. But people like Trump, to give an example, are freaked out and terrified by us. And so Trump says from day one, he is going to stop this trans madness. And number one priority for the Republican Party is to stop trans girls participating in sport, to stop trans girls playing chess.
That'll make a big difference, right?
I mean, that's really going to solve the problems of the world, isn't it? But people are really not interested outside this narrow. Currents are changing. I say in the play, bless those. Bless you if they persecute you for being who you are, because it means you are bringing about change. And bless those who persecute you too, for hatred is the only thing they have, and it doesn't amount to much. And they will lose it in the end. For no matter what they say and what they do, they cannot stop the change that is coming. And one day, we will all be free.
Amen. Thank you, Joe, so much.